Hey, Nate. Zoom recording. Okay. All right. So we ended last week with, where's my, there it is. Okay. This is chapter 6. So chapter 6 is where the king becomes aware that Mordecai has not been honored. And that's the whole, this is the turnaround chapter where Haman, everything starts to fall apart for Haman. So the verse, the Yehiyu Nikraim, it was written, it's passive. Nikraim is a passive form. So this is a little magical stuff. Like they open the book and the book just starts reading it by itself. And again, this is, why is that important? I'm not really sure if that's important contextually, but they're taking the text itself very seriously. So since Nikra is written in passive form, it was written, it was read before him. So it sounds like nobody was reading it. It just read by itself. Vayimatzeh chatuv. And it was, again, this is also passive. It was, they're understanding katuv here. Oh gosh, I wish I knew English grammar better. But katuv is like being written as opposed to it was written. So they're taking it literally, and it was found that it was being written. It says katav mibaile. It should have been written. Vayimatzeh katav. It was found to have been written, but it's got this kind of imperfect sense. So it was found that it was being written. So this is a lesson where we're learning something from this. What was happening? That Shimshai Mochek v'Gavriel Kotev. Shimshai, who was a Persian scribe, and you can see it was mentioned in Ezra, in the book of Ezra, and he didn't care for Jews, so he was trying to erase all this stuff about Mordechai, but Gavriel, the angel, was then rewriting it. So it was going back and forth, erase, and then it was being written again. So again, a miraculous passage here. Amar Rabbi Asi, Darash Rabbi Shela, Ish Kfar Tamarna, from Rabbi Shela from Tamarna. Umakatav Shalamata Shelizchutan Shel Yisrael, Eino Nimchak, Katav Shalamala Lo Kol Shekain. So he says, if something written down below in this world, so here it's below and above geographically, not on the text. If something were written down below in this world that is for the benefit of the Jewish people cannot be erased, is it not all the more so the case that something written up above in heaven cannot be erased? So that's a good sign. See, it's God doesn't forget. All the good stuff about us is continues to exist. And it can't really be, once good stuff is written down about you, it's there for good. It's in indelible ink. Lo na'aseh imo davar. So they said, nothing's been done for him. Amar Rava, lo mipnei she'ohavim et Mordechai, ela mipnei she'sonim et Haman. So once again, you see this sense that like the rabbis, they can't let go of their own feeling that the Gentile world is out to get them, or at least their experience. So when in the text, he says, well, what do we do for this guy, Mordechai, who was so good to me, he saved my life? And the text says nothing's been done for him. Well, in the text itself, it's just a statement like we haven't, that leads the plot into Haman coming and then sharing a great idea to honor this person. Of course, Haman thinks it's about himself. And so he really exaggerates all the things they should do for the king. But Rava is understanding it as, hey, they didn't do it because they liked Mordechai. They just hated Haman. It was interpolitical rivalries in the court. And that's the only reason why they said, oh, nothing's been done for this guy. And therefore you should really do it, do something good because it'll make Haman angry. Let's see what I see. Right. And Maharsha, the commentator known as the Maharsha, adds here that Lo nasa imo davar. Davar is just a thing, right? We didn't do a thing for him, meaning like, oh, you should do something, do something little for the guy. But and so essentially they were saying that it is fitting to do something, but not necessarily something of value. Okay, so that's that they're focusing on that it's not because they want to do anything. Nobody wants to do anything positive for the Jew. Hechin lo, Tana lo hechin. So here they're just reading, they're kind of rereading the verse. Nothing, that Haman came to tell the king about the gallows that he had prepared for Mordechai, but it's prepared for him. And the Baraita says, yeah, well, really, you should be understood. Lo hechin, for himself, it was prepared. He didn't realize, in a sense, that those gallows that he's about to talk about were actually being prepared for himself.
So I had a question just about JPS translation, which insists on talking about impaling on a stake.
Right.
And so, I cannot for the life of me figure out why. I looked into it when I was sitting in on a class reading Esther in Hebrew.
Yeah, okay, so let me just get I think the reason is because the question is, what does it mean? I just want to find the exact language because I don't have it here.
It's litlot.
Litlot? Yeah, okay. So, right, so litlot usually means hanging, but in the passage in Deuteronomy where they talk about that you can't have the prisoner, the person who's deserving of the death penalty, you're supposed to hang him, but then you're supposed to take him down after a night. So the understanding is that there's two actions here. It's really about impaling a person. So because the idea is that you would have them out there for to show everybody as a display. It should be displayed, this person who was convicted of a capital crime, that but you can't have him hanging overnight. So it's a little bit, the translation is a little tricky because we usually litlot means to hang, but
right.
the how should I say, what's the word I'm looking for? Critical scholarship, the deeper understanding of the term litlot couldn't be that, because in the context, you're actually, the person's out there, they're not allowed to be out there overnight, but they're supposed to be on there as a display to scare people not to do the wrong thing. So that litlot actually means to impale the person, and not the way that we think of hanging as, the person that put a rope around his neck, he dies when his neck breaks, and then they would take him down. Here it's, you're actually keeping him impaled on a post, and then he would be up there for a while to show everybody, send a message, and then be taken down. And I think even because it seems like there's two stages. I remember that because I was often confused, and
I'm not very convinced when I look in the
passage in Deuteronomy, if I can find it.
Yeah, that's 21.
Oh, thank you.
And 23. Just found it on Halot.
So in 20, let's see how the text.
That's where it comes from, but I mean, you can also leave someone out hanging, from a tree.
Right. So it says, and he's put to death. Vitalita oto al eight. See, so I think the question is, wait a minute, he was killed and then you hung him up? That doesn't really make any sense. So I think the idea was impaled in the sense of, maybe impaled is they're just trying to find an English word to make sense of it. But basically you've put the person to death and then you display that person as a warning to everybody. The image I have in my head is, if you ever saw the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, right? They come in, they've got these pirates, dead pirates hanging from a rope to show everybody, don't, this is what happens if you're a pirate. So but the text in Deuteronomy is saying, you put him to death, you put him out there, impale, you have the body hanging, whatever that means. And then, but you can't have him out there all the time. It's a limited amount of time that you keep him out there, because you can't have him hanging out overnight. So it's kind of, you put him out there as a display and then you take him down. So I think that's where the idea comes from, that it's not, so we translate litlot in modern Hebrew is to hang something, but
it's an awful lot of biblical Hebrew too.
Yeah, right.
Including hanging your bag on a hook or something.
Right, exactly. So in the Hebrew, so I think they're just trying to make sense of the context.
A lot of this seems to be independent of the actual manner of execution.
Right, exactly. So,
Than anything.
And how you impale someone on a 75-foot high tree or whatever comes up later in this. So,
so
anyway, thank you for explaining where that comes from.
Right. So I think, so impaling could also, we think, well, I mean, to us, impaling means you stab somebody with something.
Yeah, and a different verb, I forgot what is used in the one place in the Torah that I can think of that it's clearly impaling.
Okay. Yeah, so it's
Pinchas. I mean, what Pinchas does.
Oh, right. Where he takes right. Yes, where he takes the romach, the sword.
Anyway, that's perfectly clear on what Pinchas does.
Right.
And different verbs. So
yeah. So I think they're just. So I think it's more of an issue of translation, but we're trying to explain that there's a two-stage process here. You put the guy to death, and it could be. I mean, there are 4, at least rabbinic forms of the death penalty. And some of that is confusing too. One of them is stoning, and we usually think of stoning. Again, with the movie references in The Life of Brian, right? They're throwing rocks at the person. But that's not what stoning is rabbinically. Stoning is you put a person on a slab and then you throw a big rock on top of them, and that kills them. So I think partly it's the language that trying to explain in a simple one word the meaning that we usually have a different understanding of it. So when we think of hanging, we think of somebody with a rope around their necks, but it could be that hanging here is actually putting their body up in such a way that everybody after the person has been put to death, everybody sees that as a message. Hey, this is what happens when you break this rule. So yeah, so that's a little where I think the language confusion comes in. All right, so we keep going. So Va'asechein LaMordechai. So that's the next verse that we look at. I want you to do everything to Mordechai. So I like this. This is like the reverse of the story of Abraham being told by God to put to death Isaac. So what more? Manu Mordechai. So which Mordechai? Those Jews, they're all Mordechais. Or not Jews. I mean, a lot of people have the name Mordechai. So he says, Amarli Yehudi, Mordechai Yehudi. Wait a minute. Well, a lot of Jewish guys are named Mordechai. He's so desperate. He doesn't want to admit that it's his enemy. Tuva Mordechai Ika B'Yehuda. There's a lot of Jews named Mordechai. I don't know which one to do. Hayoshev B'Shara Melech, the one who's at the gate, the king's gate. And so again, Haman trying to lessen the honor. Amar le sage le bechad diskarta inami bechad nahara. So here he says it would be certainly enough for him to receive one village as an estate or one river for the levy of taxes. And meaning here, see, this used to, obviously this is, I guess, as early as the Talmudic period, but certainly any feudal, in the feudal period, that was one of the honors. You got to levy you got to collect the taxes, and you keep a portion of it. I know that from my studies on Jews of Spain in the 14th century, that's where Jews made a lot of money. They would be given the right to collect taxes from a certain area, and of course, it made the Gentiles hate Jews, but that was a big deal to get a section or the more areas of tax collection you could get, the more wealth you would have. So here he's saying, just give him a one estate. You got to give him all this other stuff too. So that's why he says, Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. So again, in the context of the book of Esther, it seems like the king is just saying all the things you just suggested. Royal clothes, royal horse, telling everybody how great this guy is. That's what he says. Okay, do everything. But the interpretation is, Haman must have thrown out some more stuff on top of what we have in the text. So the king says, yeah, we'll give him that stuff too. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken. Provide him with all that you proposed and spoke about in addition to what I had said. So that's he's getting a lot of really good stuff. Vayikach Haman et halevush v'et hasus. Azal ashkechei diyatvi b'rabanan kamei. So he went to go, he's going to go follow this order from the king. And when he went, he found Mordechai teaching Torah, right? Mordechai is a scholar, according to the rabbinic imagination. He's a great rabbi, and he's got scholars sitting around him, studying Torah with him. And what he was doing at that time was teaching the law, Hilchot Kamitza. That's what the picture down here is. In the laws of sacrifices, the priest, many of these sacrifices would come with a handful, a kometz of grain, of fine grain. So that's the hand is showing how the priest. What does it mean, a handful? So this is the way that they would do it, grabbing their three fingers and grabbing the fine grain with their three fingers and the thumb and the pinky outstretched. So that's how they would scoop it up. And wait, is that correct? Let's see. The rite which paralleled the slaughter was performed according to many authorities. The priest would scoop out the flour with the three middle fingers. Yeah. And he would then place the flour in a sacred vessel used in the temple in order to consecrate it. Since the priest had to scoop out an exact handful of flour, the scooping of the handful is one of the most difficult rites in the temple. So that's what he was explaining. He was telling these guys to know what the rules were. And and of course, this is going to come up at the end of the path of the little narrative here. So he sees Haman with the horse's reins, and Mordechai assumes that something bad is happening. So he says he got frightened, and he said to the sages, the guy is after me, go away from him so that you should not get burnt from his coals. You don't suffer, go run, I'll take care of this. At that moment, Mordechai wraps himself in a prayer shawl and he stands up to pray, which is, of course, a good thing to do when you're in danger. Haman comes over and very respectful here, I have to say. He waits until Mordechai is finished with prayer, which I think is very, very nice. And while he's waiting there for Mordechai to finish, he's talking to the other rabbis. He's like, hey, what were you guys doing? What was he teaching you? And they said, Bisman Shabbat Mikdash Kayam, when there was a temple, Man dev mincha mete malay kumse de sulta umid kaperle. That the person who would pledge a mincha offering, a grain offering, would bring a handful of this fine flour, and then achieve, and through that gift, they would achieve atonement. They would benefit from that. And then I think that Haman says, like, oh my God, you've got one handful of flour, which Mordechai is teaching, and of course he's going to be rewarded, and that overcame my 10,000 pieces of silver. I was given real money, and this guy is talking about a handful of flour, and that is more powerful than all this money. So when he finishes praying, when Mordechai finished praying, he says to Haman, wicked man, Russia, when a slave buys property, to whom belongs the slave and to whom belongs the property? Now, this phrase, it doesn't make any sense really. What's he talking about? Because as Steinsaltz explains here, how can that, so don't think you're so great you were going to give 10,000 pieces of silver, because that was my money. I gave you that when you were a slave to me, or I gave you something when I was a slave, when you were a slave to me. It's like, what? When he was a slave to you? What are you talking about? So here, he doesn't explain it here. I thought he did. So there's this obscure midrash. I thought somewhere it does mention it. There's this obscure midrash.
We had that earlier. I forgot.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. We already did that. Yeah. So there's this obscure midrash that Haman was he was a barber, and he was just kind of hanging around, and he gets benefits. What's the Peter principle, right? He rises to his level of incompetence. But Mordechai was the guy who gave him money so that he could get through it. So there's which adds to the story, as we talked about last time, that it explains some of the resentment that Haman had. And I think I mentioned that in one of the essays written by Gerson Cohen, who was the author of the chapter that we just read in Great Ages and Ideas of the Jewish People, he basically, and even the Talmud, we saw some sense of this. It was Mordechai's arrogance that caused this whole problem, because Mordechai would, according to Dr. Cohen, he wouldn't bow down to him. I mean, come on, plenty of Jews have bowed down to powerful people before, but he wouldn't bow down, and that causes the hatred. Here, it seems to be that Mordechai was wealthy, and Haman was not, and Mordechai manipulated, took advantage of Haman's situation, and abused him, and Haman was getting back at Mordechai, or at least that's part of the resentment that Haman has towards this other advisor to the king. Okay, so then we keep going. He said, all right, so here's a little bit of humor. So Haman says to him, stand up and put on these garments and ride on the horse, for the king wants you to do so. Like, he says, let's just do it, okay? And Mordechai says, oh, I can't do all this stuff until I get to the bathhouse and trim my hair. I get a haircut, and it's not proper conduct to use the king's garments in this, disheveled state I'm in. Oh no, I got to get washed up and all this stuff. So Esther sent messengers and closed all the bathhouses and all the shops of the craftsmen, meaning the bloodletters and barbers, because she didn't want anybody. She wanted Haman to have to be denigrated and humiliated by being the one to take care of Mordechai directly. And since we know he has some barber skills, he had to do it. Here's the section about being a barber. When Haman saw that there was nobody else to do the work, he had to do it for Mordechai. So he had to wash him up, and he had to cut his hair. And and then while he was trimming his hair, he injured himself and sighed. And Mordechai said to him, what do you sign for? He said, because the man whom the king had once regarded above all others is now made a bathhouse attendant and a barber. And then Mordechai reminds him of his past. Wicked man, weren't you once a barber of the village of Khartoum? If so, why do you sigh? You have merely returned to the occupation of your youth. It was taught that that Haman, in a Baraita, that Haman was a barber in Khartoum for 22 years. Now, let's see. Was it here? Where did I read this? Maybe it was. The question comes, you're not supposed to remind somebody, oh, maybe this is, was this in the text itself? You're not supposed to remind somebody of their past. Why is he reminding them of his past and making them feel bad? Well, we saw this earlier, I think. That it's okay. It's okay to do. Oh, it was Haman. Wait, are we getting to that point? We haven't got to that point yet. Okay, I'm jumping ahead here. Okay, so he trims his hair, dresses Mordechai in the royal garments. He says, mount the horse and ride. Oh, Mordechai wants to make him feel even worse. I've been fasting because, Esther declared this 3-day fast. I'm really not able to get on the horse. So he has to bend over, and Mordechai steps on him to get onto the horse, and then he gives him a kick. Here it is. This is what I was thinking of. Isn't it written, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, right? That's and also we have this text, you're not supposed to remind somebody of their past if they were humiliated, to humiliate them. And Mordechai says, oh yeah, well, that's talking about Jews. But with regard to you, our enemies, it says, you shall tread upon their high places. So it's okay for me to embarrass you. And the verse says, and he proclaimed, so on top of all this other stuff, he has to declare publicly, thus is done for the man whom the king delights to honor. Again, another story to embarrass Haman. Haman is taken down the street. Haman's daughter sees him standing on the roof, and she assumes that her father is the one on the horse, and Mordechai is the one who's been humiliated and has to walk her father around. So she takes a chamber pot and throws the contents on her father's head, onto her father's head, thinking it's Mordechai. And then Haman raises his eyes in disgust, and she saw what she had done to her father, and in her distress she fell and died. And this explains a text that comes up afterwards in Esther. So, because it says, Vayashav Mordechai el Sha'ar HaMelech, Mordechai returns to the king's gate. Now, this is a little tricky because if he's been fasting, and we learn in chapter 4, you're not allowed to come to the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes or inside the king's gate. So what does it mean? He came to the king's gate. It means, according to Rav Sheshet, that once he enjoyed the benefits of this honor the king had given him, he went back to sackcloth and ashes. Because, in chapter 4, he can't go into the king's gate. He's got to stand outside. You're not allowed to stand out, be inside the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes. And here, what does it mean that he returned to the gate? It means he put on the sackcloth and ashes again to return to the fast. And then it tells us, Haman nidchaf el beito avel v'chafui rosh. He was in mourning, and his head was covered, in a sense of, as an expression of mourning. Again, the text itself doesn't explain why he's in mourning, just except that he's embarrassed, he's upset about the turn of events. But the rabbis reading it carefully say, no, he was actually in mourning because his daughter had just died. And so that's what he was doing. So he's Avel al Bito. He was mourning about his daughter, V'chafui Rosh, and he had, due to what happened to him, Al She'eralo, that he was humiliated, and his chamber pot had fallen on his head, so he was filthy. V'yisaper Haman lezer shishto lecholo havav. So the verse 13, it says, right? I don't think this was the whole. Was this the whole verse? Well, maybe it was. Anyway, in any case, the first part of the verse then says, "And Haman recounted to Zeresh and his wife and to all his friends what had befallen him. Oh, yeah, of course, it's the same verse. Then his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, if Mordechai, before you've begun to fall, be of the seed of the Jews, then you can't prevail over him, but you're going to fall too. Like, thanks a lot. Now you tell me. The Gemara comments at the beginning of the verse, it says his friends, but then it refers to them as wise men. And Rabbi Yochanan teaches this is a good thing to think about. Kol ha'omer davar chokhmah, anybody who says something wise, knowledgeable, afilu be'umot ha'olam, even though they might not, they might be from the nations of the world, they might be non-Jews. You know what? They're still referred to as a chacham. So we can say here that we can learn wisdom from anybody. So anybody who teaches something wise and useful and beneficial is a chacham. Let's see. The fact that there are wise men among the nations of the world is not a new idea, and is not the novelty in the verse. That's rather the Gemara is explaining that even though they were previously called his friends, their uttering even one wise statement made them worthy of being called wise men. They were wise in that they recognize that there are some Jews before whom, if Haman falls even once, it is a sign that he will never again be able to prevail over them. That's from Rabbi Pinto. And others explain that they were wise in that they were indicating to Haman that he should flee to save his life. They were trying to give him advice. Get out of here. But then, too bad for him, he got called to the king's the next dinner. But I think that this one, I don't know if this is this is the Rashash, who says, even if you say one wise thing, you can be considered a wise person. That's pretty good. That's, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a good idea because there aren't too many wise things that I might be saying. So if I say one smart thing, I'm considered a wise person. Okay. Im mizera haYehudim Mordechai amrule im misha'ar shvatim kate yachalt le. They're taking the text very, or we call it hyper literally. Mizera haYehudim, that is from Yehuda, not just Jews, but from the tribe of Judah. If it was from the other tribes, you could have beaten them. But if it's from the tribe of Yehuda, and they throw in Binyamin as well, and Ephraim and Menashe, these of course are the favorites. Yehuda from Leah, and the children of, or the descendants of Rachel, because Ephraim and Menashe are from Joseph. Lo yachol. Then, if they came from one of these four tribes, you're in trouble. Yehuda dichtiv yadcha be'oref oivecha. From Yehuda, we learn because it says because this is in the blessing of Judah, your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. The Judah will emerge victorious. And the proof that Haman cannot prevail over the others that were mentioned is as written with regard to them before Ephraim and Benjamin and Menashe stir up your might. So there's Psalm 80 refers to these three tribes. Okay, kinafol tipol lefanav. You've got two times, and once again, in modern Hebrew, it's simply, or not in biblical Hebrew, it's simply intensive. But here they're taking it hyper literally. There's two fallings, so they're going to explain it as two happenings. The Rosh Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai shtei nefilot halalu lama. Why were there two times the word fall came up here? Because they said to him, this Jewish nation is compared in the Bible to the dust of the earth, and is compared to the stars of the heaven. To teach you, when they descend, they really fall. They fall very far. But when they rise to the stars. So it's not really two fallings. I think it's just two messages from the doubling of the word tipol. When they fall, they really fall hard, but when they rise, you're in trouble. Visari say Hamelach higyu v'yavhilu v'lamed sheheviu v'hala. The verb vayavhil can mean to hurry up somebody, but it can also, a behala can be disarray, confusion. So they brought him in disarray. They didn't give him, so he was really in a mess when they brought him in, because he's got, stuff from a chamber pot on his head, and he's filthy, and he's been dusty from dragging Mordechai around. He's got his footprint on his back. I mean, he's a mess, but he doesn't have time to change. Now in chapter 7, they're at the dinner, and then Esther comes clean. Kinim karnu ani ve'ami. We are, my people and I have been sold to be destroyed, to be slain, to be annihilated. But if we had been sold merely for bondmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue, since the affliction would not have been worth, eino shoveh, would not have been worth the damage to the king. Basically saying, I wouldn't want to, I didn't want to hurt, if it had been a minor thing, I wouldn't have brought this up, because I wouldn't want to hurt your royalty, your status as king, I guess. But the Gemara explains that she said to him, this adversary, Tsar ze eino shoveh b'nezek hamelech. This adversary is not concerned with damaging the king. He's the problem. Because look what he did. He first, if remember, he was Mimuchan. We assume that he's the same guy as Mimuchan, and he caused Vashti to die, who, after she died, you were really upset about that. And now he's trying to kill me. And so, Vayomer HaMelech Achashverosh, Vayomer LaEsther HaMalka. Strange verse here. Why does it say, and the King Achashverosh said, he said to Esther, the queen? Why does he say Vayomer twice? So the explanation is that at first he turned to the translator. I guess all of a sudden we learned that she doesn't speak the same language, or maybe we should just explain as an interlocutor, because he doesn't speak to his wife directly, because even though he was very attracted to her, she's just a common woman, so he's not going to speak to her directly. He always speaks to her through a buffer. But then, once she told him that she came from the house of Saul, she was the descendant of royalty, of Israelite royalty, that's when he said, oh, okay, well then I'll talk to you directly, because we're on the same level. And the next verse states, Vatomer Esther ish tsar ve'oyev Haman hara hazeh. So the question here in the text is, why all these, why ish tsar ve'oyev, this man who is an enemy, an adversary and an enemy, Haman, this wicked Haman. Why didn't you just say this wicked Haman? What's all this? Or why didn't she say Haman at the very beginning? Haman, hara hazeh ish tsar ve'oyev. Oh, because when she started mentioning Star Va'oyev, a wicked person, an enemy of the Jewish people, she was pointing to her husband, Achashverosh, and then she was going to turn, then she mentions Haman, but fortunately an angel came and pushed her hand toward Haman. So again, we see this desire in the text that they want to make Achashverosh as wicked as well. They don't want to give him credit as being beneficial to the Jews. And so, according to Rabbi Elazar, she was pointing to Achashverosh as our enemy, but then the angel, who is more politically savvy than she is, comes and pushes her hand toward Haman. So the king gets upset the right way. And he does. And the Hamelech kam b'chamato, the king gets really upset, and he leaves the banquet, and then he goes and tells us it goes into his garden, Ginat Habitan. And then it says that he returned, and he returned in, I should have the text in front of me. He returned and he was still angry. So the Gemara explains that the text is comparing his getting up and his return. Just as he was angry when he got up, he was angry when he was even more angry when he returned. Well, why was he more angry? Because of something that happened when he was out in the garden, right? Because actually, it's a good question. Is he just trying to cool down? Like, what? When she tells him this news, why does he run out to the garden? What is it just as an act of anger and he's just stomping around? Well, no, actually, he was out there and he got even more angry because angels show up, or messengers, divine messengers show up, we should say, and they were in the garb of I don't know, I guess you'd call it gardeners or just men working around the castle, and they're uprooting trees. And he's like, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, Haman commanded us to uproot these trees. Oh, now he's really angry. So that's why he comes back. Now, Atalavete vehaman nofel alamita. What does it mean? Again, the question of tense. He comes back and Haman falls. Is falling. Why does it say he fell? That Haman had fallen on the carriage, the couch that she was sitting on to beg for forgiveness? Why does it say it's like he's continuous? He's in the process of doing it. Well, because according to Rabbi Elazar again, Milamed Sheba Malach. This again, a divine messenger shows up. Maybe this time it's an invisible one. He pilu aleha. He pushed her over. He pushed him over, just at the right moment, so that he wanted to get up, so the king wouldn't see him in this compromised position. But the angel was kept pushing him down, so make sure the king sees him in this compromising position. Amar vai mi beta vai mi bara. And that's because see the next verse is yomer hamelech. So we saw this once before. They're translated as vai, oi, like woe is me. Woe is me in my house, and woe is me outside. Inside my house, the guy is trying to make moves on my wife, and outside he's destroying all my trees. So outside you were doing it, you're destroying my property, and here too, with you're trying to conquer or force yourself upon my queen with me in the house, right there in front of me. Now, we should say that in the text itself, there's this sense that, and we saw also earlier, that the king is getting anxious. Like, first of all, Haman keeps getting invited to the dinners. Secondly, Haman, when he suggests an honor, it's not like the king seems to be pretty aware. Wait a minute, you want me? The king seems to be pretty aware that Haman's thinking about himself. And the idea that Haman thinks is appropriate honor is to be dressed in royal clothes. That is something that nobody's supposed to be able to do but the king. Ride the royal horse. That's something that nobody gets to touch the royal horse. So the king is already, in the text of Esther, is like, why is this guy keep pretending to be the king? And now he's wants my wife. Well, that's the other thing that you can't touch. So in the text, it's pretty clear the king has, that's what it means there. Hagam lichvosh et hamalka. You wanted my clothes, you want my horse, and now you want my wife? Here, their understanding is, connected to this drash of you're destroying my property and you're also taking my wife in front of me. Vayomer Charvona. Now in the text again, Charvona seems like a pretty good guy. I mean, we definitely have midrashim that suggests that Charvona was actually Elijah showing up at the right time. But here, Rabbi Elazar says, no, Charvona was wicked, and he was involved in the plot. He too wanted Mordechai executed, but there's no honor among thieves. Once he saw that his plot had not succeeded, he immediately fled, joined Mordechai's side, and this is the meaning of that which it said. Oh, it is from a verse from Job. It hurls itself at him and does not spare. He would fain flee out of its hand, meaning when God sends calamity about a wicked person, everybody leaves them. I guess unless you're Donald Trump. Okay. Vechamat hamelech shachacha. Here the issue is, why are there two chafs in the word shachacha, which they're suggesting is two types of assuaging the king. What made him feel better? Two things, or there are two, I guess, assuagings. What were they? Achat shel malko shel olam ve'achat shel Achashverosh. The king of the world, God was assuaged, and that wrath was assuaged, and the one of Achashverosh. The other possibility is that it was all about Achashverosh. It was Achashverosh was really upset. He was still angry at Haman for killing off Vashti, and he was upset about what he was trying to do to Esther. And so by now hanging Haman, he was comforted from both those reasons for anger. Oh, now we get into this passage about Joseph. Because there's a lot of connections between Joseph and the book of Esther, in that Joseph also is a Jew who rises to a very high position in a foreign court. And so now we're going to get to this passage about, they bring in this, but it's going to relate to the Esther story. To all of them, he gave a man changes of clothing, but to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. This is when they're leaving, they're going back home to Jacob. And Joseph is giving all this beneficial stuff to his younger brother, his full brother. And the Gemara says, is that what, after Joseph suffered from favoritism by his father, is he going to do the same thing and arouse enmity from his brothers by showing favoritism to Benjamin? And so Rav Bar Machasya, on this, continuing on this, said that Rav Chama Bar Guria said that Rav said, due to the weight of 2 sela of fine wool, right? That's how much of wool it took to give that fine, the coat of many colors. The story progressed, and our forefathers went down to Egypt. I mean, that was, for the unnecessary gift of the coat, besides all the other favoritism, that caused our forefathers to end up in Egypt. How could he have done the same thing to Benjamin? And Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet says he wasn't showing favoritism. Rather, he intimated to him that a descendant was destined to issue from him who would go out from the presence of the king wearing 5 royal garments. And that was the connection. It was foreshadowing. He gave 5 changes of clothing to Benjamin, and Mordechai, who was of the tribe of Benjamin, went forth with clothing of 5 royal colors, apparel of different colors. And we have that. We have Levushe Malchut. We don't have the whole verse here, but it's blue, white, crown of gold, fine linen, and purple. But since we've mentioned Joseph's story, we're going to go back to Midrashim about Joseph and Benjamin. Vayipol al Tzavarei Binyamin Achiv, Joseph fell on his brother's neck and wept. But the term here, Tzavarei, I mean, how many necks do you have? So what did it mean? It wasn't necks. It was, again, a foreshadowing. Joseph was crying over the 2 temples that were destined to be destroyed in Benjamin's territory, because that's where Benjamin and Judah are connected. Though that's the southern tribes, and then there's the 10 northern tribes. And so the area of Benjamin is where Jerusalem was, which was incorporated into the greater tribe of Judah. So that's what he was. It was 2 temples. And then it says, Binyamin bacha al tzivarav. He cried over the tabernacle of Shiloh that was destined to be described in the tribal territory of Joseph, which I think was in Ephraim. V'hine einechem ro'ot ve'einei achi Binyamin. Behold, your eyes see in the eyes of my brother Benjamin. So Rabbi Elazar says, Joseph said to his brothers as follows: just as I harbor no resentment in my heart towards my brother Benjamin, for he wasn't even there when you guys sold me, I harbor no resentment toward you. So here, a nechem, again, being understood in a metaphorically, I see Benjamin and I see you equally. I don't harbor resentment to either of you. And then it says, that is my mouth that speaks to you. That it is my mouth that speaks to you. Just as my mouth, so is my heart. So just as I'm speaking, what's coming out of my mouth right now, what I'm saying to you is how I feel in my heart. There's no hidden agenda here. And we keep going about the Joseph story. Ula aviv shalach kazot asara chamorim nosim mitov Mitzrayim. And to his father he sent after this manner 10 donkeys laden with all the good things of Egypt. What are the good things of Egypt? Well, Rabbi Benjamin Bar Yefet again explains in the name of Rabbi Elazar. He sent him aged wine, which the elderly find pleasing. Okay.
I don't know how good the wine was then, but
that sounds good.
But we thought that
right
sounded good.
Yeah. Right.
But I think we also liked good aged wine when not classified as elderly.
Right. Yeah, because new wine is probably not that good, right? It hasn't. But what else did they drink in those days, right? I mean, they didn't. There wasn't. Is water and I guess some kind of fermented wine.
Mesopotamia beer was the common.
Beer.
Yeah, right, exactly. Something fermented. Okay, Vayechu gam echav vayiplu lefanav. And his brothers went. This is at the very end. This is after Jacob has died, and the brothers are very anxious about how they'll be received by Joseph. What if he's going to, now that dad is dead, he'll remember all the bad things we did to him. So again, Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, said, this explains the folk saying that people say, when the fox is in its hour, bow down to it, right? When the fox is a lowly animal, but when he's strong, you still bow down to it. But that's problematic for the Gemara, because what do you mean you're comparing Joseph to a fox? I mean, that sounds like he's inferior to his brothers. Rather, and because it's the inferior animal is you're bowing down to, as opposed to the lion, let's say. So rather, that statement makes more sense in this other verse in chapter 47, when Joseph comes to see his father, and it says that Israel bowed himself upon the head of the bed. That's when it makes sense. When the fox is in its hour, bow down to it. Jacob bows down before his son Joseph. Jacob was he's one of the patriarchs. He was greater, but even when Joseph had risen to this position, he bowed down to his own son. And at this point, when they bowed down to him, he comforted them, he spoke to their hearts. Again, Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, says, this teaches that he spoke to them words that are acceptable to the heart. He alleviated their fears. And that is, if 10 lights could not put out one light, if all of you were unable to do any harm to me, how would I be able to put out your lights? Okay, so now we're back to the text. Are we just about done here? Or how far are we going here? oh yeah, a little bit more. Okay. Now we're back to the text. The text, La Yehudim Haita Orav Simcha V'Zason Vikar, text that we recite at Havdalah. So each of these things represents something. Light is Torah, followed by a verse in which Torah is connected to a lamp. Simcha is festivals, because we've got a verse that talks about, it has Simcha in it with the word festival. Sason, this refers to circumcision, because once again, they were able to circumcise their sons. And in Psalm 119, there's a reference to the term sas, rejoicing at your word. And there's a midrash that understands this is David's rejoicing over the mitzvah of circumcision. A little bit of stretch there, but vikar, this is tefillin. So these are all special things to the Jewish people. All these 4 words reference something special for Jews. And this is the tefillin because it says, all the peoples of the earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will be afraid of you. What does this have to do with tefillin? Well, in a Baraita, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol taught, this is referring to the tefillin worn on the head. Right, that's got God's name. Well, it's got the shin on one side, and of course the tefillin have the name of God in it, in the text, that are in the tefillin. And so according to this, Haman had also banned tefillin. Clearly, this is a reference to the world they were living in, or at least during the Roman periods when some of these things were forbidden. And they were rejoicing when they were able to get them back. And then we have the text here in the book of Esther, in the scroll of Esther, I should say, the Megillah. This is how it's written. You can the picture isn't very good here, but you can see it's written a special way, 10 lines, and it's written 2 clear columns with a enlarged vav. These are the 10 names of the children. Parshandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Purata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Yazata. Here's how the text of the Song at the Sea looks. You see, it's like brick by brick. You know, there's the intermediate line is in the middle, and then on the sides they have the side columns. So it's broken up differently. So it says here, when reading the Megillah, the names of the 10 sons of Haman should be read in one breath, which is what we do today. Why is that so? Because here the explanation is they all died at one time. They all died at the same moment. Usually we explain that we don't want to dwell over their demise. That's a different way of explaining it. But here it's because they all died at the same moment. And Vayazata, the Vav in front of Yazata, is elongated as a pole, like the steering of a ship, because they were all hanged on one pole. So they're all impaled on one big pole, I guess. And then here the explain, all the songs in the Bible are written in the form of a half brick arranged upon a whole brick, and a whole brick arranged upon a half brick, which is like it is here. Whereas the sons are written, that's the principle for all biblical songs except for this one, and the song listing the kings of Canaan that are defeated by Yehoshua. These 2 songs are written, well, as they are, you can see in the picture. Why? Because you don't want them to arise. They're on top of one each other. They can't get ahead on top of, they can't overcome the one on top of them. Whereas here they'd be able to, climb up. But there you can't do it.
Okay, so we have an explanation of the elongated vav, but at least in this picture, the Zion is very tiny. Is that always true, or?
Oh, yeah, you're right. It is. And I don't know why they don't explain that here.
Yeah.
So let's
No, I
see.
just happened to notice that. So
Yeah. Well, also, yeah, a lot of that's a very good question. I don't have also in Paramashta, the shin is smaller. So they explain that. They don't give us the explanation. I'll have to go look that up. There's obviously,
yeah. I mean,
I don't know
well,
why.
they're
but
clearly trying to, I guess a couple of times they're small letters. They're clearly trying to justify. I mean, a straight vertical line down the left
Right.
side of those words. And so you've got to scrunch some things, which is, but one can imagine the rabbis at the time of the Talmud had more elaborate explanations.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. You're right. I wonder if that is, oh, here's a small top. It may
Small
be,
tav, a small vav.
yeah, it may be that they wrote it this way to get the parallel
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 lines here.
Yeah.
But I'm going to guess that they'll also give us an explanation, that there'll be a midrashic explanation, because usually that's how it follows, is it right? I mean, even in the Torah text where you have dots over some words are enlarged, some words are small. We don't have an explanation, a clear explanation of why that was done that way, but they come up with explanation.
Right.
That's
Right.
a fact.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I'll have to look into some midrashim on Esther and see if they explain that. Vayomer HaMelech leEsther HaMelekah b'Shushana b'Ra hargu haYehudim. Now, they understand this, once again, trying to make the king out to be a bad guy. That when he said this first part of the phrase, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the capital, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done? What have they done in the rest of the provinces? That he's angry about this. What are you guys doing? But then it says, now, what do you want? What's your petition? What would you like to do? That's how they're reading it. Which is interesting because I've always read it as like, he's just kind of giving a report. Well, the Jews have done all this. Here's what else do you want me to do? But here, Rabbi Abahu is saying he was angry, and then the angel comes, slaps him so that he couldn't finish what he was going to say, and he has a different tune. And that's why he says at the end, what's your petition? So at first he was upset. The Jews have done all this destruction. Why does he then change and say, what else do you want to do? It's because the angel came and got in the way. Here too, they're reading very carefully. When she came before the king, he said, along with the book or the letter, that's how they're translated here. He said that the letter. So why does it say he? Why doesn't it say she said? She came before the king. It should have been she who recited the letter. And the explanation is she wanted Achashverosh to say this by mouth. Ye'amer bapeh ma shekatuv b'sefer. You go out there and tell everybody, I wrote it, but you say these words so that it will have greater strength. Divrei shalom ve'emet, amar Rabbi Tanchum ve'amri la amar Rabbi Yassi. So this is Rabbi Tanchum, or maybe it was Rabbi Yassi. This has to do with the way the Megillah scroll is written. It's got to be written with scoring. That is, if you ever look in any of these texts, the scribe begins by scoring a line into the parchment, and then they write, actually, as opposed to we usually write down to the line, they write from the line down. All the letters hang on that line, and that's how a Torah scroll is written. And they're saying that this word, I think it's the word emet here, is teaching you it has to be done the same way. So divrei shalom ve'emet means it should be written the same way as a other sacred text. Maybe it's divrei shalom. I'm not really sure how it has to do with the word emet being not truthful but faithful or something. Let's see what here. Well, it just tells you the halacha. It doesn't say how they got it from this text. But I think it does have to do with the word emet. It should be done the same way. Uma amar Esther kiyam. Ma amar Esther in divrei hatzomot la. So this is because there are two verses here. The verses say the matters of the fast and their cry and the decree of Esther confirm these words of Purim. Read them together. So it's the matters of the fast and their cry and the decree of Esther confirm these matters of Purim. The matters of the fast and their cry, the decree of Esther confirm, that should be read as one. It's basically what it's saying, that all of these things should be observed. The fasts before Purim that we still observe, we observe 1 day of a fast before Purim, and the decree. These were all confirmed by this, and the story that should be read. All of this is should be confirmed through her decree. And then we have Ki Mordechai Yehudim Mishneh LeMelech Achashverosh V'Gadol Yehudim. This is the end of the Torah, the end of the text. V'Ratzui L'Rov Echav. For Mordechai the Jew was second to the king, great among the Jews, and accepted by the majority. It's a little weird here. What do you L'Rov Echav? Most of his brethren. L'Rov Echav. But what does it mean by the majority? Well, they didn't all accept him, his leadership. This teaches that some members of the Sanhedrin parted from him. Why? Because he occupied himself with community needs, and he was therefore compelled to neglect his Torah study. This was a mistake. And so, here we go. I thought it was good. Yeah. So I just think this is interesting. Once again, the rabbinic hierarchy of values. Torah comes before everything. And therefore, the fact that he had to give, again, remember, Mordechai is a rabbi in their eyes, and he's a teacher. The fact that he had to lessen the amount of Torah study he did in order to go out and, be the political leader, that was a weakness, according to some. And Rav Yosef explains, studying Torah, Gadol Talmud Torah yoter mehatzalat nefashot. It's even more important than saving lives. When listing the Jewish leaders who came to Eretz Yisrael, and here's the proof, Mordechai was mentioned after 4 other people, but in another text, he's listed after 5, so he got taken down a peg. In the book of Ezra, it mentions Mordechai, those who came with Zerubbabel to Babylonia, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Re'aliah, Mordechai, and Bilshan. But in the book of Nehemiah, Mordechai is mentioned later. Yeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nachmani, Mordechai. So he was knocked down a bit because he wasn't being the scholar that he should be. Now the text here says, Gemara is not indicating that saving lives is less important than studying Torah, except that's what it is saying. Rather, since Mordechai had already saved the Jews, a number of sages were angry with him for continuing to be involved in affairs of state with the intention of preventing further danger to the Jews. In this regard, the study of Torah should take precedence. So basically they're saying, after he saved, because remember, this is the last chapter, this is the last couple of verses. So even after everybody got saved, everything is good for the Jews in Persia, and he's still involved as the number 2 man in Persia. Should have gone back to the ivory tower and studied Torah and taught Torah. Instead, he was connected. Now, this is interesting because is this a response to the world that they're living in, where in Babylonia you had the exilarch, who was supposed to be at least on the level of scholars, who really enjoyed the trappings of political power, because he was involved in the Babylonian and Persian monarch's cabinet, I guess you could call it. Maybe that's a response, but that's anyway. That's Rav Yosef, is that Torah studying is even more important than saving lives. I think did we go farther? I think maybe one more paragraph. Amar Rav Itme Rav Shmuel Bar Marta. So this is Rav, or it might have been Shmuel Bar Marta. Gadol Talmud Torah Yoter Binyan Beit HaMikdash. So we've started already with, Torah is greater than X. So here it's greater than rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. Shekolzman Shebaruch ben Neriah. Baruch ben Neriah was Jeremiah's scribe, the prophet Jeremiah's scribe. And as long as he was alive, and they were, this is assuming that Baruch ben Neriah was exiled to Babylonia, Lo hinicho Ezra ve'Allah. So all the time that Baruch ben Neriah, who again, he was a scribe, but understanding he was a great scholar, Ezra, his student, would not leave his side. He stayed in Babylonia in exile. It's only after he died that he came to live in the land of Israel. And his job when he came to the land of Israel was to make sure that the temple was rebuilt. So studying Torah is more important than rebuilding the temple. All right. So I think let's tell you. Okay. So we're getting close to the end of our commentary on the book of Esther, and then we're going to go right into chapter 2. So that's starting this week. So we'll see everybody next week at 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Have a good day.
Have a good weekend.